You will take that tray to the beggar yourself, Evelyn, since feeding vermin appears to be the only accomplishment left to you. Lady Euphemia Blackmere spoke loudly enough for every guest in the Greyhaven ballroom to hear. The musicians had paused. Nearly 80 members of the county's finest families turned toward the long windows. Beyond the glass doors, a ragged man stood in the December rain. Water ran from the brim of his battered hat. His coat was too thin for the cold, and mud darkened his boots. Evelyn Blackmere held a silver tray of untouched food. A young viscount laughed first. Two ladies hid smiles behind their fans, then laughter moved through the ballroom. Evelyn felt each sound more keenly than a slap. Her father, the Earl of Blackmere, stood beside the fireplace. He looked at her once, then lowered his eyes to his wine. Euphemia pointed toward the doors. "Go on. Let us see whether charity can make an old maid less ridiculous." Evelyn crossed the room while the guests watched, unaware that the starving stranger outside carried a secret powerful enough to shake the Blackmere family to its foundations. Before we return to the beginning, tell us where you are listening from tonight. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of courage and justice. If these tales bring warmth to your evening, please consider supporting the channel. Now let us return to the winter morning when Evelyn first understood that Greyhaven was no longer her home. 3 months earlier, the village church bells had tolled for Evelyn's mother. Countess Marianne Blackmere had not died suddenly. She had faded through 2 winters, growing smaller beneath embroidered blankets, while physicians spoke softly of weakness in the heart. Evelyn had cared for her through the long nights. She had warmed broth, measured medicine, changed linen, and read aloud when Marianne could no longer hold a book. The Earl visited the sick room each evening, but he never remained long. Illness frightened him. He called his absence duty because cowardice was an uglier word. Evelyn had been 32 when her mother died. That age was mentioned after the funeral more often than her grief. A woman of 32 without a husband was regarded not merely as unfortunate, but as unfinished. Evelyn had once received proposals. She had refused to leave while her mother needed her. One gentleman had waited nearly a year. Another had suggested placing the Countess entirely in the hands of servants. Evelyn had dismissed them both. She did not regret it. Not then. Not even when the cost became clear. Lady Euphemia arrived at Greyhaven 6 weeks after the funeral. She was a distant cousin of the Earl's, twice widowed, handsome in the severe manner of a carved monument. Her first husband had left debts. Her second had left a respectable name and little money. She came with 4 trunks, a silent maid called Bess, and a talent for making every demand sound like a sacrifice. At first, Euphemia called herself a companion to the household. Within a fortnight, she controlled the menus. Within a month, she decided who might visit. By the end of the 2nd month, Marianne's keys hung at her waist. The Earl married her in the private chapel before the black crape had been removed from every mirror. Evelyn stood beside her younger half-brother Arthur during the ceremony. Arthur was 24, charming when sober, careless when not, and burdened by gambling obligations no one discussed openly. He would inherit the title and most of the estate. Evelyn had accepted that since childhood. Her mother, however, had prepared a separate settlement for her. It was not a dazzling fortune. It was enough for a modest house, a companion if she wished, and an annual income no male relative could easily withhold. 3 days before her death, Marianne had gripped Evelyn's hand. "Mr. Harcourt has arranged everything. Your father knows. The papers are safe." "Where are they?" Marianne's eyes had moved toward the locked escritoire near the window. Before she could answer, Euphemia had entered carrying tea. After the funeral, the escritoire disappeared. When Evelyn asked about it, Euphemia said the worm-eaten piece had been burned. Mr. Harcourt, the family solicitor, had gone abroad to attend a sick brother. His London clerk sent only a brief note stating that no meeting could be arranged before his return. The Earl refused to discuss money. "Must we speak of accounts while I am mourning?" he demanded. Yet it was not mourning that kept him in his study. Greyhaven was in debt. 2 poor harvests had weakened the northern farms. Repairs to tenants' cottages had been postponed. Arthur's gambling notes had reached men who knew the value of public embarrassment. The ballroom roof leaked near the musicians' gallery. though Euphemia ordered Paris silk for new curtains. At dinner, the table still held pheasant, glazed ham, stewed pears, jellies, sugared almonds, and wine from the Earl's cellar. Below stairs, the servants whispered that the butcher had not been paid. Evelyn noticed such things because Marianne had taught her to notice. She knew which tenant had lost cattle. She knew the housekeeper's nephew had injured his hand at the mill. She knew the youngest scullery maid sent half her wages to a widowed mother. For years, Evelyn had kept small household books of her own. Marianne trusted her with charitable expenses and winter provisions. Evelyn could total a page of figures faster than Arthur could name his creditors. Euphemia called the habit unbecoming. "A lady who counts pennies soon begins to look like one," she said. For the first time in her life, Evelyn understood that usefulness could be treated as a defect when it gave a woman knowledge. Her position weakened by degrees. Euphemia moved her from the south bedroom to a narrow chamber near the servants' staircase. She dismissed Evelyn's maid, claiming Greyhaven could not afford unnecessary wages. She intercepted invitations and answered them without consultation. When neighbors called, she said Evelyn was too overcome by grief to receive anyone. The isolation was not sudden. That was why it succeeded. A closed door here, a missing letter there, a carriage that departed without her. By the time Evelyn understood the design, half the county believed she had chosen seclusion. Only Mrs. Finch, the old housekeeper, continued to treat her as Marianne's daughter. Mrs. Finch had served Greyhaven for 40 years. She possessed silver hair, aching knees, and an authority no title could have improved. She ruled the servants' hall with a wooden spoon and a memory sharper than any ledger. One evening, Evelyn helped her fold linen beside the kitchen fire. The room smelled of bread, onions, soap, and damp wool. Beyond the walls, winter pressed against the house. Mrs. Finch glanced toward the passage. "Her ladyship has taken to locking the West Library." "My mother's library?" "Aye, and Mr. Vale goes in after midnight." Mr. Vale was Euphemia's private man of business. He had narrow shoulders, polished nails, and the habit of listening without moving his eyes. "What do they discuss?" "If I knew that," Mrs. Finch said, "I would charge admission." Evelyn smiled despite herself. The housekeeper's expression became grave. "Your mother never trusted that man." Evelyn remembered hearing Vale's name during Marianne's final illness. Her mother had awakened from a fever and seized her wrist. "Do not let Vale alter the figures." At the time, Evelyn had believed it the confusion of pain. Now the words returned with terrible precision. The West Library contained estate ledgers, tenancy records, correspondence, and old family papers. After Marianne's death, Euphemia claimed the room required sorting. She took the key from Marianne's ring and kept it. Evelyn began to watch. She watched her father sign papers without reading them. She watched Arthur receive money after private conversations with Euphemia. She watched Vale leave Greyhaven with packets beneath his coat. Most disturbing of all, she watched letters vanish. A note from Evelyn's cousin Rosalind arrived one morning, while Evelyn stood in the entrance hall. The footman placed it upon a salver. Before she could take it, Euphemia stepped between them. "The seal bears Rosalind's crest," Evelyn said. "Your eyesight is remarkable. The letter is addressed to me." Euphemia lifted the envelope. "You are not mistress here." "No. But I am not a prisoner." The hall fell silent. 2 footmen stared at the floor. A maid froze with a coal scuttle in her hands. No one dared breathe. Euphemia smiled. "Not a prisoner, certainly. Prisoners are maintained at public expense. You are maintained by your father." The cruelty was spoken softly, which made it worse. Evelyn reached for the letter. Euphemia drew it back. "Your cousin has invited you to London. You will decline." "Why?" "Because Greyhaven cannot endure the expense of presenting a woman who has already failed to secure a husband." Heat rose to Evelyn's face. Beneath the humiliation, however, another feeling formed. Not despair, calculation. Rosalind lived in Bloomsbury and helped a charitable society train impoverished women in nursing and household management. Marianne had once called such work unsuitable for an earl's daughter. During her final months, she had admitted the world was changing. Had Rosalind offered Evelyn a place? Euphemia carried the letter into the morning room. That afternoon, Evelyn found fresh ash beneath the grate. Near the fender lay a blackened corner of paper. 6 words remained. Room prepared. Work is honest. Come. Evelyn folded the fragment into her sleeve. For the first time in her life, she considered leaving Greyhaven not as a disgraced dependent, but as a woman capable of earning her bread. She had little money. Her purse held 7 shillings and a few coins. Euphemia had stopped her allowance, claiming economies were necessary. Evelyn owned jewellery, but most pieces had belonged to Marianne, and selling them felt like a second burial. Still, she began to prepare. She copied useful addresses from old correspondence. She studied railway times in Arthur's discarded newspaper. She packed 2 plain dresses, a wool cloak, and her mother's prayer book into a small travelling case. She told no one except Mrs. Finch. London is not kind, the housekeeper warned. Neither is Greyhaven. True enough. London at least charges honestly for the privilege. Then Mrs. Finch took her hand. Wait a little longer. Your mother left more than prayers behind. What do you mean? Before she could answer, footsteps sounded in the corridor. The kitchen door opened. Mr. Vale stood upon the threshold. Lady Euphemia requests Miss Blackmere in the drawing-room. His gaze moved from Evelyn's face to the small travelling case beside the table. He said nothing about it. That silence frightened her more than an accusation. In the drawing-room, the Earl sat near the fire. Arthur leaned against the mantel, pale and restless. Euphemia stood beside a table where several papers had been arranged in exact alignment. Vale closed the door. A difficulty has arisen, the Earl began. An opportunity, Euphemia corrected. Arthur looked away. Evelyn saw her own name upon the first page. What opportunity? A marriage. The proposed husband was Sir Gideon Mott, a widowed baronet of 58, with 2 grown sons and an estate in Cumberland. Evelyn had met him once. He had spent supper complaining that education made women ungrateful. I will not marry him. Her father flinched. You have not heard the terms. I have heard enough. Sir Gideon is willing to overlook your age and your unfortunate reserve, Euphemia said. Certain financial arrangements would benefit Greyhaven. Evelyn looked at Arthur. How much do you owe? His face reddened. This is not about me. It was entirely about him. She turned to the Earl. You would sell my consent to settle Arthur's debts. Mind your language. Then read the paper aloud. The room became still. The fire shifted in the grate. No one else moved. Read the terms, father. He could not. Euphemia folded her hands. The arrangement is common among families of our rank. Common is not the same as honourable. Honour does not repair roofs or preserve land. No, Evelyn said, but dishonour may lose both. Vale's eyes sharpened. For one instant, she knew she had struck near something hidden. Euphemia stepped closer. You possess no independent means. You have no household. No gentleman of suitable rank is likely to offer another future. Sir Gideon provides security. He provides a cage. A gilded cage remains better than the servant's passage. The Earl whispered Evelyn's name, not in defence, but in warning. He wanted her to stop making his cowardice visible. Evelyn faced him. Did my mother leave me a settlement? Arthur straightened. Euphemia did not blink. Your mother discussed many impractical intentions during her illness. That was not my question. The Earl lowered his gaze. The estate's affairs are complicated. Was there a settlement? Vale answered. No valid instrument has been found. Found. The word had been chosen carefully. Evelyn remembered the vanished escritoire, the locked library, the ashes, and Marianne's warning about altered figures. Then one exists. Euphemia's face hardened. You will sign tomorrow. No, your refusal will have consequences. It already has. Evelyn opened the door. Behind her, Euphemia spoke in a voice as cold as the rain. Then you will remain in this house only upon my terms. The punishment began the next morning. Evelyn was forbidden the carriage. Her meals arrived cold. Servants were instructed not to carry messages for her. Her name disappeared from the guest list for the winter ball. 3 days before the event, Euphemia changed her mind. Evelyn would attend, she announced, because absence might encourage gossip. The true reason soon became clear. Sir Gideon had accepted his invitation. The ballroom glittered on the night of the gathering. Candles multiplied in tall mirrors. Gentlemen wore black coats and white gloves. Women moved beneath the chandeliers in velvet, satin, pearls, and pale lace. Footmen carried silver trays through air scented with perfume, beeswax, roasted meat, and wet wool. Outside, rain struck the windows. Evelyn wore an old grey gown that had belonged to Marianne. Euphemia refused money for alterations, so Mrs. Finch adjusted it by candlelight. "You look like yourself," the housekeeper said. "Is that sufficient? It ought to be." Though society has never forgiven a woman for requiring nothing from it. For the first hour, Evelyn remained near the wall. Old acquaintances greeted her, but Euphemia appeared whenever conversation deepened. She told one gentleman that Evelyn had become fragile. She told another that grief had affected her judgment. The rumors were beginning. Evelyn heard more beside a half-open door near the music room. Euphemia's voice came from the corridor beyond. "She has grown erratic," Vale answered. "Then witnesses must observe it." And the physician? Prepared to recommend rest and supervision. Evelyn stood perfectly still. They were not merely forcing a marriage. They were preparing to call her incapable of managing her own affairs. A frightened woman could be described as unstable. Her objections could become symptoms. Every accusation concerning the missing settlement could be dismissed as delusion. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt terror without confusion. The fear was sharp, clean, useful. It showed her where the danger stood. She returned to the ballroom before anyone noticed her absence. Sir Gideon approached soon afterward. "Miss Blackmere, your father tells me you are reconsidering. My father is mistaken. A wife should be guided away from stubborn habits. Then I hope your next wife proves more obedient than your last." A nearby lady gasped. Sir Gideon's smile vanished. Euphemia appeared at once. "What has Evelyn said now?" Sir Gideon repeated the exchange, changing its tone and adding an insult. Evelyn had not spoken. Euphemia placed a hand over her heart. "Evelyn, you shame us." Arthur stood close enough to have heard everything. "Tell them what was said," Evelyn told him. Arthur stared into his glass. "I heard only part of it. Not a lie. Not the truth. Something worse." The nearest guests fell silent. Then Sir Gideon laughed. "Perhaps Lady Euphemia is correct about her condition." Others laughed with him. At that moment, a footman entered from the terrace. "My lady, there is a man outside asking for food." Euphemia turned. "Send him away. He says he has walked from the village. Then he may walk back." Through the glass doors, Evelyn saw the stranger waiting in the rain. His shoulders were broad despite his weary stoop. His beard was rough, and mud covered the lower part of his coat. Yet there was something unusual in the stillness with which he endured the cold. He did not press his hands to the glass. He did not bow his head. He merely stood outside while warmth and abundance shone before him. A footman carried untouched dishes toward the servants' passage. Evelyn took one of the trays. Euphemia raised her voice. "You will take that tray to the beggar yourself, Evelyn, since feeding vermin appears to be the only accomplishment left to you." The ballroom laughed. The Earl looked down. Evelyn walked toward the terrace. A footman opened the doors, and Winter entered the room. Cold rain touched her face. Music ceased behind her. She crossed the stones while the guests watched through the glass. The stranger lifted his head. His eyes were clear. Far too clear for a drunken wanderer. Evelyn offered him the tray. "There is bread, meat, and hot broth. You may come to the kitchen fire when you have eaten." He studied her. "Will your family permit that? It is my family's kitchen too." The claim was not legally certain. It was morally true. He accepted the bread, but left the silver spoon untouched. "You are kind to a man who can repay nothing. Kindness is not a loan." Laughter rose faintly behind them. The stranger looked toward the ballroom. "And those people? They believe hunger is amusing when observed through glass." He broke the bread slowly. Evelyn noticed his hands. Dirt marked the skin, but the nails beneath were clean. A pale circle remained upon one finger, as though a heavy ring had recently been removed. His speech was wrong for his clothes. No village laborer spoke with such calm precision. "Who are you?" she asked. "Tonight, merely a hungry man." He glanced past her. Euphemia was speaking urgently to Vale. Vale stared at the stranger with sudden alarm. The beggar saw it too. He lowered his voice. "The locked library has a second door." Evelyn's breath caught. "How could you know that?" Asked the old housekeeper what was hidden beneath the blue ledger. He placed the spoon back upon the tray. Then he descended the terrace steps and disappeared into the rain before she could stop him. Evelyn returned to the ballroom alone. Euphemia seized her arm. What did he say? Nothing of importance. The first lie Evelyn had ever told her, stepmother, came easily. Long after the last carriage departed, Evelyn found Mrs. Finch in the servants' hall. What was hidden beneath the blue ledger? The housekeeper went pale. Only the kitchen clock moved. Then Mrs. Finch locked the door, drew Evelyn toward the dying fire, and removed a small brass key from inside her bodice. "Your mother gave me this the night before she died. She said I must not use it until someone asked about the blue ledger." Evelyn stared at the key. Who was that man? I do not know. But if he knows the library, he has been inside Greyhaven before. A floorboard creaked beyond the servants' door. Someone was listening. Written 1/8,000, 12000 words. The floorboard creaked again. Mrs. Finch closed her fingers around the brass key. Evelyn raised one hand for silence. Beyond the servants' door, a shadow moved across the narrow strip of light beneath it. Someone had been standing in the corridor. Someone who now knew that the blue ledger mattered. Mrs. Finch reached for the iron poker. "Not yet," Evelyn whispered. She crossed the room and opened the door sharply. The passage was empty. A candle burned at the far corner, its flame bent in the draught. Near the wall lay a small smear of wet mud. Mr. Vale had worn dry evening slippers at the ball. Arthur had retired nearly an hour earlier. Euphemia's maid, Bess, wore narrow boots. Any of them might have listened. Or someone else remained in the house. Mrs. Finch came beside her. "Did you see anyone?" "No. That is rarely the same as no one being there." Evelyn closed and locked the door. Mrs. Finch placed the brass key upon the kitchen table. It was small, darkened with age, and cut with 3 uneven teeth. "Your mother gave it to me after Lady Euphemia left the sick room that final night," she said. "Her hand was so weak she could scarcely close my fingers around it. She told me the blue ledger must not be opened until the proper person came." What proper person? She could not finish. Evelyn touched the key. Did she say where the ledger was? Only that it remained in the West Library, and that the door we all knew was not the only entrance. The beggar had said the same thing. He had not wandered to Greyhaven by chance, nor had he come merely for food. Whoever he was, he knew Marianne's secret. "We cannot go tonight," Evelyn said. Mrs. Finch frowned. "Most of the household is asleep, and whoever listened expects us to act at once." The old housekeeper studied her. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt another person waiting for her judgment, rather than offering judgment upon her. She slipped the key into her sleeve. "Tomorrow we behave as though nothing happened, and tomorrow night we discover who watches the library." Greyhaven awoke beneath hard frost. The rain had stopped before dawn. Ice silvered the terrace where Evelyn had fed the stranger. His footprints had vanished beneath those of servants clearing the steps. A tray arrived in Evelyn's chamber with weak tea, 1 cold egg, and bread cut so thin that light showed through it. Bess carried it. The maid placed the tray upon the table without meeting Evelyn's eyes. "Did you enjoy the ball?" Evelyn asked. "I was below stairs, miss." "Below stairs hears more than the ballroom." Bess's hands tightened around the empty salver. "I hear nothing that concerns me." Evelyn noticed a dark stain upon the hem of her skirt. Mud. Yet every outdoor path had been frozen since dawn. "Were you in the servants' corridor after midnight?" Bess looked at her then. "No, miss." The answer came too quickly. Evelyn poured tea. "You may tell Lady Euphemia that I slept well." Bess's mouth parted. "I did not say." "No, you did not." The maid left without another word. Near noon, the Earl summoned Evelyn to his study. He sat among neglected account books and unopened letters. Grey light entered through the windows. The fire had burned low. He looked older than he had during the ball. "Sit down, Evelyn." She remained standing. "You embarrassed Lady Euphemia before our guests." "I fed a hungry man. You defied the mistress of this house. My mother was mistress of this house. The Earl closed his eyes. Must every conversation return to Marianne? Every conversation returns to her, because you have allowed another woman to erase her. His hand struck the desk. Enough. The room fell silent. For a moment, Evelyn saw the man he had once been. Not brave, perhaps, but capable of anger when his comfort was threatened. He pushed a paper toward her. Sir Gideon remains willing to proceed. Then he is more foolish than I believed. Euphemia says your conduct is becoming erratic. The Earl stared at her. Has she used that word? Has Mr. Vale? Has a physician already been invited to decide whether grief has weakened my mind? Colour left his face. No physician has been invited. It was not a denial of the rest. Evelyn stepped closer. Have you read the documents you sign? Of course. Then why were the North Farm rents removed from last quarter's summary? His eyes moved toward a closed ledger. How would you know that? Because my mother taught me the accounts. Those matters are no longer your concern. They concern every tenant who pays Greyhaven and every servant whose wages depend upon it. He rose. You have always mistaken competence for authority. No, father. You have always mistaken obedience for peace. The room became silent again. He looked toward Marianne's portrait above the fireplace. For one brief instant, regret softened his face. Then fear returned. You will cease questioning Euphemia. You will accept Sir Gideon. In return, I shall ensure you are treated with proper consideration. Evelyn understood the offer. Not affection, not justice. A gentler captivity. She turned toward the door. Where are you going? To consider how little proper consideration costs the person who offers it. As she reached the threshold, the Earl spoke. Your mother's settlement cannot save you. Evelyn stopped. He had said cannot. Not, did not exist. She looked back slowly. You knew about it. The Earl understood his mistake. His mouth tightened. Marianne had intentions. Intentions are not instruments. Was it signed? Leave this room. Did you witness it? Leave. Evelyn obeyed because she had learned what she needed. Her father knew more than he had admitted. That afternoon, she walked to the village under the pretense of visiting Marianne's grave. Euphemia had forbidden her the carriage. The cold punished her at once. Wind entered through the seams of her cloak. Frozen ruts made every step uncertain. Greyhaven stood behind her, its windows glowing with fires. She was no longer permitted to approach without invitation. By the time Evelyn reached the churchyard, her fingers were numb. She stood before Marianne's stone only a few minutes. No prayer came. Questions crowded every quiet place within her. Why had Marianne hidden the key? Why had the stranger known of it? Why had the Earl said the settlement could not save her? Evelyn left the churchyard and entered the market street. The village moved beneath the cold with practical determination. A fishmonger scattered salt over his stones. Women bargained over potatoes and onions. A boy carried firewood twice his own height. Warm air scented with flour and yeast drifted from the baker's doorway. Evelyn had passed through the village all her life. That day, for the first time, she entered it without a carriage, servant or family name announced before her. No one laughed. An old woman selling apples offered her a stool. The baker's wife recognized her and pressed a warm roll into her hands. Your mother never let anyone go hungry in winter. This one is paid for. Evelyn accepted it, not as charity, as memory. The difference mattered. Rosalind's burnt letter fragment remained hidden in her glove. Evelyn went to the post office and wrote 3 lines. I received enough of your letter to understand. I may need work and a room sooner than expected. Send your reply through Mrs. Finch's married sister at the Red Hart Inn. She signed no title, only Evelyn. As she folded the page, a tall man entered wearing a plain, dark coat. He carried himself like a gentleman accustomed to being obeyed, though no servant followed him. A faint scar crossed one eyebrow. Evelyn recognized his eyes. Clear. Watchful. The beggar. He did not look at her. He asked the postmaster for a parcel addressed to Mr. Nathaniel Reed. The name meant nothing to Evelyn. His voice did. The postmaster went into the rear room. Last night, you were hungry, Evelyn said quietly. The man studied the notices upon the wall. Last night, many people were hungry. You changed your coat, a useful skill in England. Who are you? He turned. Not here. You know my mother's library. I knew it before Lady Euphemia placed a lock upon it. Did you know my mother? His expression shifted. Yes. How? The postmaster returned, carrying a wrapped parcel. Mr. Reed accepted it and moved toward the door. As he passed Evelyn, he murmured, "The Red Hart, rear parlour, 4:30." Then he left. Evelyn should have returned to Greyhaven. Meeting an unknown man in an inn could destroy what remained of her reputation, yet others were already preparing to destroy it. For the first time in her life, she chose danger because obedience had become more dangerous. At 4:30, she entered the Red Hart through the side door. The rear parlour was small and warm. A peat fire burned beneath a dark mantel. The tables bore scratches from years of travellers, merchants, and railwaymen. The stranger stood beside the window. He had removed his hat. His dark hair was touched with grey at the temples. "Is Nathaniel Reed your name?" Evelyn asked. "It is one of them." "Then give me the one that matters." He faced her. "Adrian Vale knows me as Lord Adrian Wycliffe." The title struck her. Wycliffe. She knew it from society pages and old conversations. The Duke of Ravensshade had lived abroad for years after his elder brother's death. He possessed northern estates, interests in railways, and little patience for London society. "You are the Duke of Ravensshade." "I am." Why would a duke dress as a beggar? To learn what people reveal when they believe a man has no power. The answer was calm. It was also incomplete. "You came for Vale." "Yes." The Duke explained that Vale had once served his brother's estate. Money had vanished from tenant accounts. Receipts had been altered. Witnesses withdrew complaints after threats. There had not been enough proof to charge him. Vale disappeared before the inquiry ended. "And you found him at Greyhaven," Evelyn said. "I found payments linked to him. Some passed through accounts connected to your stepmother's second husband. Others led here." Evelyn sat slowly. What did my mother know? The Duke removed a packet from his coat. "Countess Marianne wrote to my brother 8 years ago. She suspected Vale had begun advising your father on private loans. Later, she wrote to me. She believed Greyhaven's debts were being used to conceal transfers from money placed in trust for you." Evelyn's hands became cold, despite the fire. "You have her letters?" "Copies. The originals were sent to a solicitor." "Mr. Harcourt?" He nodded. "Why did he leave England?" "He did not leave voluntarily." Evelyn rose. "What do you mean?" "Harcourt was attacked on the road to Dover. His injuries were not fatal, but his memory failed for several weeks. Vale's clerk then informed Greyhaven that Harcourt had gone abroad. The room fell silent. Her stepmother had lied. Vale had lied. Perhaps her father had chosen not to question either lie, because truth required courage. "Where is Mr. Harcourt now?" "Recovering in London under another physician's care. He remembers more each day." "Why did you not come openly?" "Because Vale would destroy whatever remains. He knows my name. He does not know how much proof I possess." Evelyn remembered his alarm at the ballroom windows. "He recognized you, perhaps. Or he feared that someone had begun asking questions." The Duke moved closer to the fire. "Your mother's letters mention a blue estate ledger. She believed Vale recorded genuine transfers there before rewriting the official books." "And the hidden door?" "I used it years ago when visiting Greyhaven with my brother. It opens from the old schoolroom corridor behind a panel." "Why tell me?" "Because I cannot enter unnoticed now. You can." Evelyn looked at him. "You expect me to search a locked library while my family prepares to call me mad?" "I expect nothing. I am telling you where the truth may be." The distinction sounded honorable. She did not trust it yet. "You tested us last night." He did not deny it. "You stood outside while food enough for 100 people waited inside. You wanted to see who would help. I wanted to observe Vale's reaction. And mine?" His gaze met hers. "I did not expect yours." For a moment, neither spoke. "Why were you truly dressed as a beggar?" she asked. "Because a duke entering Greyhaven would receive bows, wine, and lies. A starving man received the truth." The laughter behind the glass returned to her. The Duke handed her a folded paper. It was a copy of one line from Marianne's letter. "If Evelyn is left without means, look beneath the blue ledger." Finch has the key. Trust the account marked. MB Evelyn read it twice. The Duke watched her. Do not remove the ledger if you find it. Vale will know. Copy what matters. I have copied accounts before. Your mother wrote that you were better at figures than any clerk your father employed. Grief rose unexpectedly in Evelyn's throat. Not weakness, recognition. Someone had preserved Marianne's belief in her. How do I contact you? Leave a note at the inn, addressed to Mr. Reed. If I disappear, take any evidence to Mr. Harcourt's London office and ask for his senior clerk, Thomas Bell. The Duke placed his hat upon his head. You should return before dark. Last night, you said you could repay nothing. Last night, I was a hungry man. And tonight, a man in your debt. Evelyn's expression remained steady. Do not mistake one meal for trust. Something like approval entered his face. I would be disappointed if you did. The walk back to Greyhaven was colder, yet the cold no longer felt like punishment alone. It sharpened her thoughts. Marianne had suspected theft. Harcourt had been silenced. Vale had altered accounts before. Euphemia needed Evelyn declared incapable. The marriage to Sir Gideon would remove her from Greyhaven and place her under a husband unlikely to question financial documents. Every cruelty now belonged to the same design. When Evelyn reached the house, dusk had fallen. Bess waited inside the servants' entrance. Lady Euphemia asks where you have been. At my mother's grave. For 5 hours? Grief has no timetable. Bess looked over her shoulder. Do not drink anything sent to your room tonight. Evelyn became still. Why? The maid's face tightened. I have said too much. She turned away. Did you listen outside the servants' hall last night? Bess stopped. No. The denial lacked force. Who did? Bess hurried down the passage. A witness of low rank held part of the truth. But fear still held the witness more tightly. That evening, Euphemia received Evelyn in the small drawing room. Sir Gideon sat beside the fire. Vale stood near the writing desk. A fourth man waited by the window. He was elderly, with a red-veined nose and a black medical bag. Evelyn understood at once. Euphemia smiled. Dr. Pritchard has kindly agreed to examine you. I am not ill. A patient is rarely the best judge of her own condition, the doctor said. Sir Gideon folded his hands over his waistcoat. We are all concerned for you. Concern has gathered quickly since I refused your proposal. Vale stepped forward. Your family reports agitation, suspicion, wandering without explanation, and hostile statements before witnesses. The trap was closing. If she protested, they would call it agitation. If she accused them, they would call it suspicion. For the first time in her life, Evelyn understood that dignity sometimes required performance. She softened her voice. Perhaps I have been difficult. Euphemia's eyes narrowed. My mother's death affected me more deeply than I wished to admit. The ball exhausted me. I regret speaking sharply to Sir Gideon. Sir Gideon smiled. A generous apology. It was not an apology. It was bait. Dr. Pritchard opened his bag. Some rest would be wise. A mild draught may calm the nerves. No medicine is necessary. Bess has already prepared tea, Euphemia said. The tea arrived on a silver tray. Bess carried it, her face colorless. Euphemia poured a cup. Drink, Evelyn. The room became silent. Steam rose from the porcelain. Evelyn lifted the cup. A faint bitterness reached her before the liquid touched her lips. She rested the rim against her mouth, coughed into her handkerchief, and tipped part of the tea into its folded cloth. I beg your pardon. Drink the rest, Euphemia said. In a moment. Dr. Pritchard watched too closely. Evelyn lowered her eyes and let her shoulders sag. Within minutes, she spoke more slowly. She allowed one hand to tremble. Then she asked permission to retire. For the first time in her life, she pretended weakness to preserve her strength. Euphemia permitted Bess to escort her upstairs. Inside the chamber, Evelyn closed the door. How much was in the tea? Bess's breath caught. I do not know what you mean. Evelyn unfolded the stained handkerchief. Do not lie when the evidence is still warm. Bess covered her mouth. He said it would only make you sleep. Who? Dr. Pritchard gave the bottle to Lady Euphemia. Mr. Vale told me to add 12 drops. Tonight? For 3 nights. The headaches, The missing hours, the dreams Evelyn had blamed upon grief, they had already begun. Why warn me? Bess began to cry without sound. Lady Euphemia said that once the physician signed his statement, you would be taken away. She said no one listens to women after the carriage door closes. The truth had risen from below stairs. Evelyn squeezed the drugged tea from the handkerchief into a clean medicine vial. You will say nothing of this conversation. Bess nodded. Tomorrow, tell Lady Euphemia I slept heavily and woke confused. The maid stared. You want her to think it worked? Yes. What will you do? Evelyn closed her fingers around the brass key in her sleeve. Tonight, I shall become exactly as helpless as they need me to appear. Near midnight, Bess extinguished the corridor lamp outside Evelyn's room. An hour later, Evelyn slipped into the servants' staircase wearing her plainest dress. Mrs. Finch waited below with a candle, a pencil, and several sheets of paper hidden inside a folded apron. Together they crossed the silent house. At the old schoolroom corridor, Mrs. Finch pressed the carved edge of a wall panel. Nothing happened. She tried again. Wood shifted with a soft groan. Behind it stood a narrow door. The brass key entered the lock. For one terrible moment, it refused to turn. Then the mechanism yielded. The West Library lay beyond. Moonlight crossed the shelves. The familiar main door remained locked from inside. Papers covered Marianne's old desk. 2 ledgers stood open beside an inkstand. Evelyn and Mrs. Finch entered. They searched without speaking. Blue account books filled the lower shelves. Most were too new. One bore the year of Marianne's marriage, and the initials M.B. Evelyn pulled it free. Beneath it lay a shallow wooden compartment. The brass key opened that too. Inside were folded receipts, a sealed letter addressed to Mr. Harcourt, and a narrow book bound in faded green leather. Evelyn opened the book. Columns of figures filled the pages. Money from Marianne's settlement had been transferred into Greyhaven estate accounts. Portions had then been paid to Vale, others had covered Arthur's debts. At the bottom of one page appeared the Earl's signature. Evelyn felt the room tilt. Her father had not merely remained silent, he had signed. Mrs. Finch touched her arm. Footsteps sounded beyond the main library door. A key entered the outer lock. Vale's voice came from the corridor. Lady Euphemia believes the drug has taken effect. The handle began to turn. Written 2/8,000, 12000 words. Vale's key turned in the lock. Evelyn closed the green ledger. Mrs. Finch extinguished the candle. Darkness swallowed the library. The hidden door stood 3 paces behind them, but reaching it would mean crossing the strip of moonlight on the carpet. The main door opened. Vale entered carrying a lamp. Dr. Pritchard followed. Evelyn and Mrs. Finch pressed themselves behind the heavy curtain beside the window. Dust filled Evelyn's nose. She held the ledger beneath her cloak, tight against her ribs. Vale placed the lamp upon Marianne's desk. Lady Euphemia believes the drug has taken effect, he said. It should have, Dr. Pritchard replied. 12 drops would keep a grown man asleep until morning. And the earlier doses? Confusion, headache, weakness, precisely what we require. There was no guilt in the physician's voice, only calculation. Vale lifted the blue ledger. He saw the open compartment beneath it. Who has been here? Dr. Pritchard looked toward the locked door. No one could enter. Vale searched the desk and shelves. His shadow moved across the curtain. Once, his hand brushed the fabric inches from Evelyn's face. No one dared breathe. The green ledger is gone, he whispered. Could Lady Euphemia have taken it? She does not know this compartment exists. Then the housekeeper. Finch has no key. Vale stared at the empty space. Unless Marianne gave her one. Mrs. Finch's fingers closed around Evelyn's wrist. Vale turned toward the window, the curtains. He reached for the fabric. A bell rang violently below stairs. A crash followed. Then a servant shouted from the corridor. Fire in the still room. Vale withdrew his hand. Dr. Pritchard cursed. They hurried from the library, locking the main door behind them. Evelyn waited until their footsteps faded. Bess, Mrs. Finch whispered. The maid had created the disturbance. They escaped through the hidden passage. Smoke drifted along the servants' corridor, where maids carried buckets toward the still room. There was no true fire, only a curtain smouldering in a metal basin. Bess stood among the confusion, pale and trembling. She did not look at Evelyn. That restraint saved them all. Back in her chamber, Evelyn hid the green ledger beneath a loose floorboard. Then she examined the other papers taken from the compartment. A sealed letter was addressed to Mr. Harcourt. Several receipts named estate accounts. One bore Vale's initials. Another recorded a payment to Dr. Pritchard 6 weeks before Evelyn's supposed instability began. The most important paper was a copy of Marianne's settlement. It granted Evelyn an annual income from investments separate from Greyhaven. It also stated that if the estate used the trust without consent, repayment could be demanded from Greyhaven's revenues. Evelyn read the clause twice. Her money had not merely been stolen. The theft threatened the estate itself. Vale and Euphemia needed her married, declared incapable, or removed before Harcourt recovered. Her father had signed the transfers. Arthur's debts had consumed part of the money. The betrayal ran through the family accounts like rot beneath polished wood. Near dawn, Mrs. Finch returned. Bess has been confined to her room. Lady Euphemia believes she knocked over a lamp. Will she dismiss her? Not before questioning her. Then we must remove Bess before Vale does. Mrs. Finch looked toward the hidden ledger. And that? We copy every page that matters. Then it leaves Greyhaven. For the first time in her life, Evelyn did not merely wish to escape. She wished to understand the entire design. Only then could she destroy it. For the next 2 days, she behaved exactly as Euphemia expected. She remained in bed until noon. She spoke vaguely at meals. When Dr. Pritchard asked about the drugged evening, she claimed to remember little. Sir Gideon visited twice. Evelyn allowed him to believe her resistance had weakened. He sat beside her chair and described his Cumberland estate as though describing a prison he expected her to admire. "You will have no need to concern yourself with accounts," he said. "My steward handles all matters of money. How comforting. A wife is happiest when spared difficult decisions." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I am beginning to see that struggle has exhausted me." Sir Gideon smiled. Euphemia, seated nearby, remained watchful. Vale trusted Evelyn's surrender even less. On the third afternoon, he entered her chamber without knocking. Bess had been replaced by a younger maid. Vale stood beside the cold fireplace. "You appear improved. I have rested. Lady Euphemia tells me you are reconsidering Sir Gideon's offer. Perhaps she is right. About the marriage? About many things." Vale studied her. "Do you remember leaving the drawing room after taking Dr. Pritchard's medicine? Only fragments. Did you leave this chamber later?" Evelyn let confusion enter her expression. "Why would I? The West Library was disturbed. My mother's library? You know it remains locked." "I had forgotten." Vale glanced around the chamber. "If you remember anything, inform me." As he reached the door, Evelyn spoke. "Mr. Vale." He turned. "My father said my mother's settlement could not save me." What did he mean? His face remained still. The Earl may have spoken without precision. Was there a settlement? "No valid instrument exists." He left. Evelyn waited until his footsteps faded, then removed the copied pages from beneath her mattress. Each night, Mrs. Finch brought paper, pencil, and a flat board used for pressing linen. Evelyn copied columns until her fingers cramped. She recorded dates, amounts, account names, signatures, and corrections. A pattern emerged. Money from Marianne's trust entered Greyhaven's accounts shortly before payments to Arthur's creditors. Other sums passed through accounts associated with Euphemia before her marriage to the Earl. Several entries were marked R.W. On the fourth night, Evelyn sent Mrs. Finch to the Red Hart with a message for the Duke. She enclosed 3 copied entries and 1 question. What does R.W. mean? The answer arrived the next afternoon, hidden inside a flour sack. Ravenshade Western Rail Company. Vale purchased shares through intermediaries using stolen funds. Harcourt remembers the settlement was witnessed by your father and Arthur's former tutor. The tutor may still be alive. Below that, the Duke had written another line. Bess must leave Greyhaven tonight. Evelyn showed the note to Mrs. Finch. Why tonight? Vale knows someone entered the library. He will begin with the servants. As if summoned by the warning, raised voices sounded in the corridor. Mrs. Finch opened the door. Bess stood outside with Euphemia behind her. The maid's cheek was red. Her small trunk rested upon the floor. Euphemia addressed Evelyn. "This girl has confessed to damaging property and abandoning her duties. She is dismissed." Bess looked at Evelyn. Fear filled her eyes. Euphemia was not merely dismissing a servant. She was removing the only witness to the drugged tea. "Where will she go?" Evelyn asked. "That is not our concern. It is mine. You are in no condition to interfere." Evelyn allowed her shoulders to sink. Of course. The surrender pleased Euphemia. That was useful. Mrs. Finch accompanied Bess downstairs. Before sunset, a village cart collected the maid and her trunk. Euphemia believed she had been sent to the railway station. Instead, Mrs. Finch's sister hid her at the Red Hart. The Duke arranged passage to London the following morning. Bess carried the medicine vial, a written account of Dr. Pritchard's instructions, and copied receipts linking the physician to Vale. The truth left Greyhaven through the servants' entrance. That evening, Arthur entered Evelyn's room. He closed the door behind him. His hands shook. "You must marry Sir Gideon." Evelyn returned to the book she was pretending to read. "No, please." The words surprised her. "How much do you owe?" He stared at the fire. "More than I can pay." "How much?" £9,000. The figure was worse than Evelyn had imagined. Greyhaven could not absorb it without selling land. "Did Euphemia promise to clear it?" "If you marry Gideon." "With my settlement." Arthur looked at her sharply. "Who told you?" "So you knew." He turned away. "Not at first." "When?" "After Mother died. Father said the funds could be moved temporarily. Vale assured us the trust would be restored before Harcourt returned." "And when it was not?" Arthur's silence answered. Evelyn stood. "You allowed them to use my money. I thought it would save the estate. It saved your gaming table. You do not understand what it is to be the heir. Every man expects magnificence. Every failure becomes public. And every woman must pay for it?" "I made mistakes." "No. A mistake is a wrong figure in a ledger. You signed away money you knew was not yours." Arthur stared at her. "How do you know about the ledger?" She said nothing. His fear deepened. "Vale is searching the house. If you took something, give it back." "Why?" "Because he is dangerous." "Now you are concerned for me?" "I am concerned for all of us." "Not all of us. You are concerned for Greyhaven." Arthur stepped closer. "They intend to have you certified if you refuse Gideon." "I know." "How?" "Because I listen when men believe a woman has no power." Arthur lowered his voice. "Dr. Pritchard has prepared a statement. Vale wants father to sign tomorrow. Gideon will then take responsibility for your affairs once the marriage agreement is completed. A chain of papers, each made the next appear lawful. Does father know?" "He knows enough." That was the old answer at Greyhaven. Everyone knew enough to be guilty and too little to feel responsible. Arthur reached for her hand. "Evelyn, I am sorry." She withdrew it. Sorry is what people say when consequences finally approach them. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell the truth." "To whom?" "To everyone." His face emptied. "I cannot." "Then you have chosen." She opened the door. Before leaving, Arthur whispered, "Vale plans to burn the old account books after the engagement is announced." "When?" "At the Winter Assembly in London. Euphemia believes public approval will silence questions." "Why, tell me?" Arthur's eyes were wet. "Because I heard father say Mother would despise us." It was not courage. Not yet. But it was the first crack in his obedience. The Winter Assembly would be held in 10 days at Lady Corisande Bell's London house. Half the county would attend. Sir Gideon planned to announce the engagement before the same class of people who had laughed at Evelyn in the Greyhaven ballroom. Euphemia wanted public consent. Evelyn began to prepare a public reckoning. Rosalind's reply arrived through the Red Hart. A room was ready in Bloomsbury. Work awaited Evelyn at a small training house for women seeking employment as nurses, companions, and housekeepers. Rosalind needed someone to manage accounts, organize supplies, and teach household arithmetic. The wages were modest. They were also hers. Evelyn read the letter 3 times. For the first time in her life, she possessed a future no marriage contract had created. She wrote back, accepting. Then she began a second ledger, Not one of theft, one of work. She listed wages, rent, railway fare, food, coal and clothing. Mrs. Finch showed her how village women stretched £1 through winter. Bess, writing from London, added the cost of a shared room near Bloomsbury. Evelyn calculated carefully. She could survive, not grandly, honestly. That knowledge altered fear. Greyhaven no longer held her because she had nowhere else to go. It held her only because the evidence was not complete. The Duke returned to the village 2 days later. He waited in the church garden after dusk, where bare rose branches scratched against the stone wall. He wore a dark travelling coat and no disguise. Bess reached London safely, he said. Harcourt's clerk has her statement. And Harcourt? His memory has returned sufficiently to identify the settlement and Vale's false instructions. What of Arthur's tutor? Alive. Silas Ward teaches near York. He witnessed the settlement and retained a copy of Marianne's accompanying letter. Then we have enough. Not yet. The Duke handed her a note. Vale plans to transfer the remaining trust funds before the London Assembly. Once moved, recovery will be harder. To where? An account controlled by Euphemia under her former married name. Evelyn read the note. Then she must sign something. Yes. The Duke watched her. You are thinking of a trap. I shall allow her to believe she has won, Evelyn explained. She would accept Sir Gideon privately. Euphemia would rush to complete the transfer before the announcement. Vale would require signatures. The Duke's solicitor could follow the transaction while it occurred. And your father? He must choose whether to sign again. You expect him to refuse? No. The answer hurt, but truth no longer surprised her. I expect him to reveal himself completely. The Duke was silent. At last, he said, you need not carry this alone. A duke can stand beside me in a ballroom. He cannot decide what my father's betrayal means. No. Nor can he restore your mother. No. But he may ensure those who harmed you cannot hide behind rank. Evelyn studied him. Why does this matter so deeply to you? His expression changed. My brother discovered Vale's theft too late. He trusted men who flattered him. Tenants lost homes before the accounts were corrected. My brother died believing his carelessness had ruined families who depended upon him. You are not only pursuing Vale. I am trying to finish what my brother began. That is not the same as justice. No. His honesty surprised her. It may be partly grief and partly pride, but the evidence remains true even when motives are imperfect. For the first time in her life, Evelyn spoke to a titled man who did not disguise weakness as authority. At the assembly, do not speak until I give the signal. He raised one eyebrow. You intend to command a duke? Only one who owes me a meal. He smiled. Then I shall await instruction. They parted without touching. Yet as Evelyn walked back toward Greyhaven, she understood that trust had begun, not because he was powerful, because he had allowed her to see the limits of his power. The next morning, Evelyn requested an interview with Euphemia. Her stepmother received her in Marianne's former sitting room. Vale stood nearby. Sir Gideon had also been summoned. Evelyn wore a pale dress and no jewelry. She kept her gaze lowered. I resisted because I feared leaving Greyhaven. I now understand that Sir Gideon offers security. Sir Gideon's satisfaction was immediate. Euphemia remained cautious. You accept him? I will sign an agreement before the London Assembly, provided the engagement is announced there. Why London? Because the county believes me unstable. A public appearance may correct that impression. Vale studied her. Reasonable. And the settlement? Euphemia asked. Evelyn allowed shame to enter her face. My mother's intentions cannot alter the present. It was the sentence they had waited to hear. Sir Gideon took her hand. You will find obedience easier with practice. Evelyn did not pull away. I am sure you believe so. Vale placed papers upon the table. There are preliminary matters. The Earl must authorize the transfer of certain funds into a marital arrangement. May I read them? Sir Gideon laughed. Have you not had enough of accounts? Evelyn smiled faintly. Quite enough. That evening, the Earl entered the West Library with Euphemia and Vale. Evelyn listened from the hidden passage. The panel stood open less than an inch. Once he signs, The remaining funds move tomorrow, Euphemia said. And the green ledger? Vale asked. Still missing. The Earl's voice trembled. You said every record had been destroyed. Most were. One remains. If Evelyn found it, she is drugged, watched, and ready to marry Gideon, Euphemia said. She has surrendered. Vale did not sound convinced. The Earl paced across the room. I will not sign another transfer. Silence followed. Evelyn closed her eyes. For one fragile instant, hope rose. Then Euphemia spoke. Arthur's creditors will expose him. Greyhaven will be sold. The tenants will learn their rents paid gaming debts. And Evelyn will know you used Marianne's trust before the ink on her funeral notices had dried. Vale placed a pen upon the desk. Sign, my lord. No one dared breathe. The scratch of the pen came through the panel. Her father signed. Hope ended quietly. Vale gathered the papers. Tomorrow the money moves. At the London Assembly, Gideon takes control of Evelyn's affairs. After that, no accusation she makes will carry weight. Euphemia laughed softly, and when the Duke of Ravenshade learns he fed a madwoman instead of rescuing one, even he will withdraw. Evelyn went cold. They knew who the beggar was. The Duke may suspect me, Vale said, but suspicion is not proof. By the time he acts, the ledger will be ash, and Miss Blackmere will be in Cumberland. Then burn it tonight if you find it, Euphemia said. Their footsteps faded. Evelyn remained in the passage. Every part of the trap was visible. The signed transfer, the physician's statement, the marriage agreement, the planned destruction of evidence. She returned to her chamber and removed the green ledger from beneath the floorboard. It could no longer remain at Greyhaven. Mrs. Finch wrapped it in kitchen cloth and placed it beneath jars of blackberry preserve, seed cake, winter apples, and folded napkins. An ordinary household basket protected an extraordinary truth. A stable boy carried it to the village, where Mrs. Finch's sister delivered it to the Duke's solicitor. Evelyn kept only copied pages sewn into the lining of her cloak. That night, Vale searched her chamber. The loose board had been replaced badly. Marianne's prayer book lay open upon the wrong page. The following morning, Euphemia announced that they would leave for London at once. The assembly had been moved forward by 2 days. Vale knew the ledger was gone. The household packed in haste. Evelyn's travelling case was searched before it entered the carriage. Her letters were taken. Mrs. Finch was ordered to remain at Greyhaven. At the servants' entrance, the housekeeper adjusted Evelyn's cloak. You have the copies? Sewn into the lining. And the signal? When Arthur speaks. Mrs. Finch's eyes darkened. Do you trust him? No. Then why depend upon him? Because the trap requires him to choose where everyone can see. Mrs. Finch embraced her, not as a servant, as the only person at Greyhaven who had never asked Evelyn to become smaller. The carriage carried Evelyn, Euphemia, the Earl, Arthur, Vale, and Sir Gideon toward the railway station. Greyhaven disappeared behind winter trees. Evelyn watched until the last chimney vanished. She would return, not as a dependent, not as a prisoner. As the woman who knew what the house had cost, London received them beneath fog and gaslight. Lady Corisande de Belle's residence shone against the dark square. Carriages crowded the street. Footmen hurried beneath umbrellas. Music sounded through tall windows. The assembly had already begun. Evelyn entered on Sir Gideon's arm. Whispers followed them. Guests from the Greyhaven ball recognized her. Some remembered the beggar. Others had heard rumors of her instability and sudden engagement. Euphemia wore black velvet, diamonds, and triumph. Vale carried a leather case containing the marriage papers. The Earl looked ill. Arthur had not eaten since morning. At the far end of the ballroom stood the Duke of Ravenshade. He wore formal evening dress. No mud, no torn coat, no bowed head. Several ladies who had laughed at the beggar now competed for his attention. He did not look toward Evelyn. That was part of the plan. Lady Corisande called the room to order. Sir Gideon stepped forward and lifted Evelyn's hand. My friends, Lady Euphemia and the Earl of Blackmere have granted me the honor of announcing. The ballroom doors opened. A pale man entered, leaning upon a cane. His voice carried across the room. Before any engagement is announced, the Earl should explain why he transferred his daughter's trust without authority. Vale's leather case slipped from his hand. Mr. Harcourt had arrived, written 3 over 8001, 2000 words. Before any engagement is announced, the Earl should explain why he transferred his daughter's trust without authority. Mr. Harcourt stood beneath the ballroom doors, pale and leaning upon a cane. The musicians lowered their instruments. Conversation ceased. Sir Gideon released Evelyn's hand. Vale bent to retrieve the leather case he had dropped, but the Duke of Ravenshade crossed the floor first. "Leave it where it lies," the Duke said. His voice was quiet. No one mistook it for a request. Lady Corisande Bell stepped forward. "This is my house. I will know whether an accusation has been made against my guests." "It has," Harcourt replied. "The agreement about to be announced depends upon documents obtained through fraud." Euphemia's expression hardened. "Mr. Harcourt has been ill. His memory cannot be trusted." His gaze settled upon her. "Your concern for my health arrives rather late, my lady." A murmur moved through the guests. Euphemia turned to Lady Corisande. Miss Blackmere accepted Sir Gideon freely. "This interruption is indecent. Have you accepted him?" Lady Corisande asked Evelyn. Every face turned toward her. The copied account pages were sewn inside her cloak. Arthur stood beside the Earl, grey with fear. Across the ballroom, the Duke waited for the signal Evelyn had promised. "Not yet. I agreed to hear the terms," she said. Sir Gideon seized upon the answer. Without coercion, Harcourt moved farther into the room. Then Miss Blackmere should hear what those terms conceal. Vale recovered his composure. "You have no right to discuss private family arrangements. I drafted the original settlement. That gives me more right than the man who forged instructions in my name." The ballroom fell silent. Vale's hand tightened upon the table. "You should take care." "I did," Harcourt answered. "That is why copies exist." At the Duke's nod, 2 men entered. One was Thomas Bell, Harcourt's senior clerk. The other was Mr. Ashford, a magistrate known to several guests. Euphemia stared at them. "You bring a magistrate to an engagement?" "A private engagement does not require stolen funds, false medical statements, and a coerced signature," the Duke said. Dr. Pritchard turned toward the corridor. A footman closed the door. The Duke looked at him. "You will remain. I am a physician. You are named in receipts found among Mr. Vale's accounts." For the first time, Sir Gideon appeared uncertain. "What receipts?" Euphemia ignored him. Harcourt steadied himself upon his cane. Countess Marianne Blackmere created a properly witnessed trust for her daughter. It granted Miss Evelyn Blackmere an independent annual income and forbade the Earl, his heir, or any future guardian from transferring those funds without her written consent. The Earl stood beneath the chandelier with his head bowed. "After the Countess's death," Harcourt continued, "instructions bearing my name authorized transfers into Greyhaven estate accounts. I issued no such instructions." Vale spoke sharply. "A clerk may have acted while you were indisposed." Thomas Bell stepped forward. "No clerk in our office prepared them. The paper came from a stationer used by Mr. Vale. The signature was copied from correspondence stolen when Mr. Harcourt was attacked." The Earl looked up. "Attacked?" Harcourt faced him. "I never went abroad. I was struck from my carriage on the Dover Road. My dispatch case was stolen, and my memory failed for several weeks." The Earl turned toward Vale. "You told me he had left England." Vale said nothing. Euphemia stepped between them. Even if mistakes occurred, they were made to preserve Greyhaven. Evelyn looked at her. "You called my marriage an opportunity. A family must survive. At whose expense?" The question carried across the ballroom. The same ladies who had laughed at Greyhaven now watched in rigid silence. Evelyn removed her cloak. With embroidery scissors from Lady Corisande's table, she opened the inner seam. Copied pages slid into her hand. Vale moved toward her. "Those papers were stolen." The Duke blocked his path. "They concern Miss Blackmere's money." Evelyn handed them to Mr. Ashford. "They show transfers from my mother's trust, payments to Mr. Vale, and sums used to satisfy Arthur's creditors. They also show payments to Dr. Pritchard before anyone claimed I was unstable." The physician's face reddened. "I made no such claim." A side door opened. Bess entered in a plain brown dress. Her fear remained visible. But she walked to the center of the room. Euphemia stared at her. You were dismissed. Dismissal does not make what I saw untrue. Her voice trembled upon the first sentence. It steadied upon the second. Mr. Ashford addressed her. State your name and position. Bess Carter, former lady's maid, to Lady Euphemia Blackmere. Tell us what occurred. Bess glanced once at Evelyn, then she faced the guests. Dr. Pritchard gave Lady Euphemia a bottle. Mr. Vale ordered me to place drops in Miss Blackmere's tea. Later, I heard Lady Euphemia say that once the physician signed his statement, Miss Blackmere could be taken away and no one would believe her. Dr. Pritchard raised his voice. A servant's imagination is not evidence. Thomas Bell produced a small vial. The remaining liquid was delivered to our office. An independent physician examined it. In the quantity described, it would cause weakness, drowsiness, and confusion. Sir Gideon stepped away from Euphemia. You told me she was unstable. She was unstable, Euphemia replied. No, Evelyn said. I was drugged. The room became utterly still. Euphemia turned toward the Earl. Say something. He looked at Evelyn. His mouth opened. Nothing came. The old pain rose within her. Not surprise. Not hope. Recognition. He had remained silent when she was mocked at Greyhaven. He had remained silent when her letters vanished and her money was taken. Before the society whose approval he valued above her safety, he remained silent again. Euphemia seized his sleeve. Tell them. The transfers were necessary. They were necessary, he whispered. Arthur flinched. Harcourt looked at the Earl with sorrow. Necessity does not make fraud lawful. Vale's composure returned. Then blame the Earl. His signatures appear upon the papers. The Earl stared at him. You promised the trust would be restored, and you signed. You said no one would know. Vale smiled without warmth. That was the only promise I kept. Euphemia turned upon him. Be silent. Why? You ordered the remaining funds moved before midnight. You signed under your former married name this morning. Sir Gideon looked between them. What remaining funds? Your marriage agreement would have placed Evelyn's income under arrangements favorable to both households, Euphemia said. Favorable to whom? To us. Sir Gideon had tolerated cruelty, theft, and false accusations. Only the discovery that he had been used offended him. I shall sign nothing. Euphemia's expression changed. You were willing enough while you believed her helpless. Several guests heard. Sir Gideon faced Evelyn. Madam, I was misled. You laughed when they called me unstable, Evelyn replied. You intended to control my accounts and spoke of obedience before witnesses. Do not pretend fraud is the only thing that offends you. Lady Coerced closed her fan sharply. Sir Gideon, your carriage should be called. It was not a legal sentence. In that room, it was nearly as powerful. The baronet bowed stiffly and left beneath the gaze of people whose invitations he depended upon. Vale moved toward the doors. Mr. Ashford blocked him. You will remain until these documents and statements have been examined. On what authority? On the authority granted to me by the Crown. I will not conduct a trial in a ballroom, but I will prevent the destruction of evidence. Thomas Bell opened the leather case Vale had dropped. Inside lay the new transfer papers, the proposed marriage agreement, and Dr. Pritchard's statement declaring Evelyn incapable of managing her affairs. The statement was already signed. Mr. Ashford read several lines. Periods of delusion, irrational suspicion, hostility toward relatives, wandering without purpose. He lowered the page. Dr. Pritchard, when did you examine Miss Blackmere sufficiently to reach these conclusions? Her family supplied observations. Did you conduct an independent examination? I spoke with her. Before or after she received the substance in this vial? Dr. Pritchard did not answer. His silence condemned him. Evelyn turned toward Arthur. It was time. He knew it too. Euphemia saw the danger. Arthur, remember what happens to Greyhaven if you speak recklessly. Every person in the ballroom looked at him. He stood between his inheritance and the sister he had betrayed. For one long moment, Evelyn believed fear would win. Then Arthur stepped forward. My debts were paid with Evelyn's money. The Earl made a sound of protest. Arthur continued. I knew the funds came from Mother's trust. Father said the transfer was temporary. Mr. Vale promised the money would be restored before Harcourt returned. When it was not, Lady Euphemia arranged the marriage to Sir Gideon. Euphemia's voice sharpened. You ungrateful fool. You said the family would survive if Evelyn obeyed. It might have. No. Only the title would have survived. The family was already gone. The words struck the Earl. Arthur faced Evelyn. I believed my future mattered more than yours. I knew they intended to call you unstable, and I kept silent. This was not an apology spoken in safety. It was confession before those whose respect he feared losing. Mr. Ashford asked whether he would repeat the statement formally. Arthur looked toward the Earl. His father shook his head. Arthur answered, yes. Euphemia stepped away from him. You will lose everything, perhaps, but for once it will be mine to lose. The Duke moved. Evelyn met his eyes. That was the signal. The green ledger has been secured by my solicitor, he announced. It contains the original entries Mr. Vale believed destroyed. Mr. Harcourt's office holds the settlement. Mr. Silas Ward, the second witness, has supplied a statement and a copy of Countess Marianne's letter. Vale's face tightened. Copies prove nothing. The shares purchased through the accounts marked in that ledger have been frozen, the Duke continued. The funds cannot now be moved. You had no right. Their ownership will be decided through proper proceedings. Euphemia stared at him. You dressed as a beggar to spy upon us. I dressed as a beggar to observe Vale. The Duke looked across the ballroom. What I observed instead was a room full of well-fed people laughing at hunger. Several guests lowered their eyes. Only one person offered food, he said. Not because she knew my title, not because anyone approved. She helped because hunger itself was reason enough. Every gaze turned toward Evelyn. This time, the silence did not humiliate her. It belonged to her. Lady Corisande approached. Miss Blackmere, I repeated concerns about your judgment, without asking whether their source was trustworthy. She looked toward Euphemia. That was cowardly. Her admission changed the room. An elderly countess said Euphemia had told her Evelyn was violent. Another woman admitted she had heard Evelyn refused all visitors. A gentleman near the fireplace said Vale had discouraged him from contacting Harcourt. The rumors unraveled as publicly as they had been spread. Truth moved from mouth to mouth, not cleanly, not kindly, but irreversibly. Euphemia saw her authority disappearing beneath the chandeliers. You have ruined Greyhaven, she told Evelyn. No, I have shown what was done to it. Your mother would never have exposed her family like this. My mother hid evidence because she knew corruption had already exposed it. The Earl raised his head. Do not speak for Marianne. Then speak for her yourself, father. He looked at the documents, at Arthur, and finally at Evelyn. I knew the first transfer was wrong. No one moved. Vale said the money would be replaced after harvest. Then Arthur's creditors demanded more. Euphemia said, your settlement could be joined to a marriage without lasting harm. And when they drugged me? He closed his eyes. I did not know at first. At first, Evelyn repeated. The correction struck him. Later, I suspected. But you said nothing. I was afraid. Of losing Greyhaven. Of losing everything. You chose the house over your daughter. The Earl began to cry. He looked neither noble nor powerful, only old. I am sorry. Evelyn had comforted frightened people all her life. Her mother through illness, Arthur after debts, her father after every failure he refused to name. For the first time in her life, she allowed another person to carry his own sorrow. I believe you are sorry, but I will not make your sorrow easier by pretending it repairs mine. He bowed his head. Euphemia stared at Evelyn with open hatred. Do you believe society will welcome you now? It forgives scandal only while it remains entertaining. Perhaps. Evelyn looked around the ballroom. But I no longer require its welcome in order to live. And how will you live? On sympathy? On wages? The words sounded strange amid velvet, diamonds, silver trays, and pearl-handled fans. I have accepted work in Bloomsbury, Evelyn said. I shall manage accounts and train women for honest employment. A few guests exchanged glances. Work? Sir Gideon said from the outer hall. The Duke turned toward him. Yes, the activity by which most of England survives. Sir Gideon left. Mr. Ashford instructed that Vale and Dr. Pritchard be taken to a private room while statements were prepared. No force was needed. Dr. Pritchard began claiming he had been deceived. Bess looked at him. "You counted the drops yourself." He stopped speaking. As Vale passed Evelyn, he murmured, "You will regret this. You believe that because regret is the only future you understand." He was led away. Euphemia was not arrested that night. Her part required fuller examination, yet her social punishment began at once. Lady Corisande requested Lady Euphemia's carriage. Not the Blackmere carriage. The distinction was deliberate. Women who had crowded around Euphemia stepped away. Gentlemen turned their backs. No one offered her a hand as she descended the steps. The doors that had opened for her began to close. The Earl remained with Arthur. Neither approached Evelyn. For once, they understood that she would decide the distance between them. The Duke came near only after the room began to empty. "You commanded the evening well. I had assistance from a solicitor, a magistrate, a servant, an heir, and a duke. Yet none of us could have begun without you." Evelyn looked toward the supper tables, where food remained upon silver platters. "Do you still claim one meal placed you in my debt?" "No. What do you claim now? That you gave me something rarer?" She waited. A reason to trust my own judgment again. The answer demanded nothing. That was why she believed it. Evelyn moved into Rosalind's Bloomsbury house 3 days later. Her room was narrow. Wallpaper peeled near the window. Street sounds entered before dawn. Coal had to be counted, and hot water came only when someone carried it upstairs. She loved it. She placed her first wages in a new ledger. She managed food orders, corrected unpaid bills, and taught women to keep accounts, compare wages, and recognize false deductions. Bess joined the training house as an assistant. At first, she apologized whenever she entered a room. By spring, she instructed new students with a firmness that reminded Evelyn of Mrs. Finch. Arthur sold 2 horses, withdrew from his clubs, and testified against Vale. He did not become virtuous overnight. He complained about lost comforts and struggled with work. Yet consequences could no longer be transferred to Evelyn. The Earl surrendered management of Greyhaven's finances to trustees chosen with Harcourt's help. Portions of the estate were sold. Remaining revenues first repaired tenant cottages and repaid Evelyn's trust. Euphemia's invitations ceased. Former allies claimed never to have trusted her. She lived apart from the Earl while legal inquiries continued. Dr. Pritchard lost respectable patients. Vale faced proceedings for fraud and theft. Justice did not arrive as a single thunderclap. It arrived through statements, frozen accounts, returned money, and doors that no longer opened. 8 months later, Evelyn returned to Greyhaven. She traveled by train, then hired a modest carriage in the village. No family crest marked its door. Mrs. Finch waited at the servants' entrance. Evelyn stepped down there by choice. The housekeeper embraced her fiercely. "You have grown thin. I have grown employed." Same thing in London, I suppose. Greyhaven had changed. The ballroom curtains remained faded because tenant roofs had been repaired first. Fewer servants worked in the house, but their wages were paid. The Earl waited in the garden. Early roses opened beside the stone wall. He stood without a hat. "I asked you here because I wish to apologize where no one could mistake it for performance." Evelyn listened. "I chose reputation over you. I chose the estate over justice. I allowed them to call your strength illness because your strength exposed my weakness." The words were plain. That mattered. "I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask permission to write sometimes." "You may write." Hope entered his face. "I may not answer." It faded, but he nodded. "That is fair." They did not embrace. Not every garden required reconciliation to become peaceful. Arthur later spoke of learning estate accounts under the trustees and admitted he hated every hour. Mrs. Finch declared that this was the first proof the work might improve him. Before leaving, Evelyn visited Marianne's grave. She placed there a small page from her wage ledger, folded beneath rosemary. Her mother had tried to secure her future with money. Evelyn had secured it again with truth and work. The Duke waited at the village inn. They walked together through the market. No ballroom watched. No announcement had been prepared. At the baker's door, Evelyn bought 2 warm rolls and handed him one. "Is this another act of charity?" he asked. No, this one is a loan, he laughed. And the terms? You may repay me by walking beside me without disguise. He offered his arm. Evelyn took it. Not because he was a duke. Not because he could offer a title, house, or protection. Because he had first stood before her with nothing visible to offer, and she had first stood before him with nothing left to prove. They walked through the village while afternoon light warmed the windows. Behind them, fresh bread was placed upon the baker's shelf. Ahead, the road divided toward London and Greyhaven. Evelyn no longer feared either direction. Kindness reveals character, but courage restores freedom. If Evelyn's story moved you, please like the video, subscribe for more tales of dignity and justice, and consider supporting the channel so these stories may continue.